doctor was horrified. What he found beneath her cast was truly terrible. It had all begun on a rainy autumn evening as Lena was walking home from the university. The streets gleamed slick and black under the dim glow of the streetlights, and her new boots, lacking proper traction, slid treacherously on a patch of wet leaves. A single moment of inattention was all it took. Her ankle twisted violently, followed by a sharp, sickening crack and a surge of pain so severe it drove her to the cold, wet asphalt. Gasping for breath, she lay immobilized, the world reduced to the throbbing in her leg until concerned passers-by rushed to her aid, one immediately calling for an ambulance. In the sterile, rattling interior of the emergency vehicle, Lena tried to focus on breathing slowly, but a cold panic was already coiling in her stomach. At the hospital, the x-rays confirmed a fracture of the tibia. The doctor was brisk and professional, stating matter-of-factly that it was a clean break, fortunately without displacement, and that it would heal perfectly well with a cast. As the plaster was applied, layer upon cold, wet layer, Lena felt as if she were being sealed into a rigid, white prison. The material hardened, encasing her leg in an immobile shell, and with it, a profound sense of confinement settled over her. Returning home, every aspect of her daily routine became an ordeal. Stairs were monumental obstacles, showering was a complex ritual involving plastic bags and tape, and a simple trip to the grocery store became a precarious balancing act between her crutches and a shopping cart. She kept repeating 6 weeks to herself like a mantra, but after the first few nights spent tossing and turning, the heavy, itchy cast making sleep impossible, she knew with a sinking certainty that those 6 weeks would feel like an eternity. The initial days were a relentless struggle against her new limitations. Her crutches scraped and tapped against every surface. Her palms grew raw and blistered, and she seemed to trip over every rug and doorstep. At the university, she felt like a spectacle, navigating cramped lecture halls and enduring the pitying glances or clumsy jokes from classmates. So, athletic career over, one had grinned, a comment that made her laugh weakly while she seethed inside. The constant dependence on others for the simplest tasks, carrying a book or a coffee, chafed at her fiercely independent nature. Evenings were the worst, spent alone with a growing sense of isolation as she marked off the interminable days on her calendar with grim determination. But more troubling than the inconvenience was the creeping, insidious feeling that something was deeply wrong. At first, she tried to dismiss the intense itching as a normal part of the healing process, but within 2 weeks, it had evolved from a mild annoyance into a persistent, maddening sensation, as if 1,000 tiny needles were pricking constantly at her skin. At times, she could have sworn she felt a faint, skittering movement, a sensation so vivid she would stare in horror at the unyielding plaster. Then came the smell. It started as a faint, slightly sweet odor, barely noticeable, but it soon grew stronger, becoming a pungent, unmistakably foul scent of decay that seemed to seep from the very edges of the cast. Her attempts to rationalize it, blaming poor ventilation or sweat, rang hollow. Lying awake at night, she could hear the dull thud of her own heartbeat echoing within the cast, a sound that now seemed ominous. When she timidly voiced her concerns to friends and family, she was met with dismissal. "You're just imagining it," they said, or, "That's completely normal, don't drive yourself crazy." But Lena's every instinct screamed that this was not normal. Her concentration frayed, her thoughts perpetually circling back to the alien object grafted to her leg. The cast seemed to have a life of its own. Sometimes she even fancied she could hear a faint, dry rustling from within its depths. The odor became so potent that strangers on the bus would shift away from her in disgust, trapped and unheard. Lena began to doubt not just the cast, but her own sanity. A prisoner in a white cage that was hiding a terrible, festering secret. The doctor was horrified, for what he discovered beneath her cast was a sight too awful to comprehend. The ordeal had escalated subtly at first, marked by hushed whispers and disapproving glances from her fellow students in the library. One of them even wrinkled his nose in clear disgust, a gesture that sent a hot wave of shame through Lena, who could do nothing but bow her head and endure it. Increasingly, she began to isolate herself, retreating to the confines of her small apartment to escape the judgmental eyes of the world. It was during one of these lonely evenings, as she examined the cast with a growing sense of dread, that she noticed them, dark, ominous stains seeping through the fabric, shadows that had not been there before. A cold panic gripped her heart. She tried to convince herself it was merely dirt accumulated from daily life, but the gnawing doubt was relentless, a constant, terrifying companion. Her mother, seeking to offer comfort, insisted she wait for the scheduled checkup appointment. "Don't work yourself up," she urged. "The doctors know what they're doing." But Lena knew, with a primal certainty, that her own body was screaming a warning that could no longer be ignored. The nights transformed into a special kind of horror. She would wake drenched in cold sweat, gripped by the unshakable conviction that something was moving beneath her skin. It was no longer just an itch or a dull ache. It was a profound, chilling fear of the unknown horror festering within the plaster prison. The day of the checkup finally arrived, and Lena counted down the hours as if her very life depended on it. From the moment she stepped into the clinic, her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. The sterile scent of disinfectant mingled nauseatingly with the heavy odor of her own fear. The doctor greeted her with routine professionalism, picking up the electric cast saw with an air of calm efficiency. Lena clenched her jaw, her knuckles white, as the high-pitched whir of the tool vibrated through the room. The first cut into the plaster sent a cloud of white dust into the air, and with it came an overwhelming, putrid stench that immediately caused everyone in the room to freeze. The nurse instinctively brought a hand to her mouth, her eyes wide with shock. The doctor's brow furrowed deeply as he muttered, "This is not normal." As the final layers of the cast were pried apart, opening like a grotesque shell, the sight that was revealed made even the experienced physician recoil. The skin beneath was a landscape of ruin, angry red, macerated from constant moisture, and interspersed with weeping, pustulent sores. Most horrifying of all, nestled within the damp, decaying folds were tiny white maggots, still wriggling with life. A scream tore from Lena's throat, raw and involuntary. As tears blurred the nightmarish vision, she wanted to look away, but her gaze was locked in horrified fascination. "Immediate disinfection and antibiotics," the doctor barked, his voice sharp with urgency, sending the nursing staff into a flurry of controlled panic. The room descended into a chaos of shouted orders and frantic movement, but for Lena, the world had narrowed to a single terrible truth. Every fear she had suppressed, every instinct she had doubted, had been real. The days following the shocking discovery in the clinic passed in a blur for Lena. She was immediately admitted as an inpatient, her leg meticulously cleaned and rebandaged daily as powerful antibiotics coursed through her veins to ward off a systemic blood infection. She felt profoundly weak and vulnerable, yet simultaneously washed over with an immense wave of relief that the hidden danger had finally been uncovered. However, the mental image of what had been festering under the cast haunted her relentlessly. Visions of the maggots and the feeling of something living under her skin invaded her thoughts and ripped her from sleep with nightmares in which the plaster encased not just her leg, but her entire body. Over time, the physical wounds began to heal, and after several weeks, she was cautiously learning to walk again, but the psychological scars ran deep. She had emerged from the ordeal forever changed, more cautious, and profoundly more attuned to the signals of her own body. When her doctor finally discharged her, he looked at her gravely and said, "You are a very lucky woman. Had you waited any longer, this could have become life-threatening." Later, Lena found the courage to share her story publicly, first with close friends, and then, to her own surprise, on social media. Thousands reacted with shock and sympathy, with many expressing gratitude for the stark warning. Her message was clear and powerful: never ignore an alarm signal from your own body. What was found under my cast was unbelievable, but in the end, it may have saved my life. Lena's story serves as a powerful reminder of how quickly a simple accident can spiral into a nightmare, and it underscores the critical importance of listening to and trusting our own physical instincts. If this story resonated with you, please leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and activate the bell notification so you don't miss any of our dramatic real-life stories. I would also love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. What would you have done in Lena's situation? Would you have reacted to the symptoms earlier? And remember, sharing helps. This very story might one day save the life of someone you know. Have you ever experienced an injury or a health issue that seemed completely harmless at first, but then surprisingly developed into something serious? Perhaps it was a sprained ankle that you initially thought would just get better on its own, but the persistent pain eventually forced you to get an X-ray, only to discover it was actually a small fracture. Or maybe it was a tiny, barely noticeable scrape you got while gardening, which you ignored until the next day when it felt red, warm, and had turned into an unpleasant infection that required antibiotic cream. Stories like these are often more impactful than any general warning because they show how quickly things can change. That's why I would love for you to share your own experiences in the comments below. Tell us about the moment you realized it was more than just a minor ache or pain. I'll be reading every single story, and I'm genuinely curious to hear what you've been through. And who knows, perhaps your personal account could be the very thing that helps another viewer pay attention to their body's warning signals in a similar situation and encourage them to see a doctor when in doubt, even if it's just to be safe. That's all about our stories. Do you have any thoughts after hearing the story? Please share it in the comments below.